My guest today is a woman who's lived several impressive careers in one lifetime in areas of public life and community service that couldn't be more different: science and politics. She enjoyed a career of more than 25 years in medical research, first in hepatology, where she led the team that performed Australia's first liver cell transplant, before shifting focus to become a world-leading researcher in an entirely different field of paediatric food allergy. And then, at the height of this second career and in her early 50s, she made another bold change and moved into politics, first running unsuccessfully in Victoria in 2018, followed by success the following year in the federal seat of Higgins. You're probably wondering how she made such a big change. And if you're sitting with your own career question, wondering if a move or a big change at this point in your life is going to be worth it, well, you need to hear today's guest, Dr. Katie Allen. Not only has she walked this path, but her recent diagnosis of stage 4 cancer brings her new perspective, and she's generously agreed to share that with us today. I'm joining her here today in her home, in the Blue Room, which is full of warmth with beautiful light coming in, as we sit together to have this conversation on her time in science and politics. Katie, welcome.
Thank you. Love to see you, Sue.
I've been trying to find the right words to describe you to our listeners, and I've got all your credentials written down and spent quite a bit of time preparing for today's interview, looking back on your career. You're a paediatrician, a professor, politician, board member, consultant, so many things. What words do you use these days to describe yourself?
Well, I suppose I'd like to say kind and caring, but probably just crazy and courageous.
I love that. Completely outside of the kind of the traditional labels of roles and more into the kind of the person that you are, which I love that. So let's start this conversation with where you and I first met at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, which is based at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. And for those not familiar with MCRI, it's a world-leading child and adolescent health research institute. And at the time we met, we were both in our 40s. You were leading the Centre for Food and Allergy Research, so you'd already made that first big career change. And you held an executive role as the director of the theme of population health. And I was a social scientist and co-led a research group in community child health, which was part of the theme of population health. So as such, you were my boss.
Can't boss you around, Sue.
And at that time, you were a woman at the peak of your career by any measure. Can you take us into that? What was it like for you at that peak?
Well, I was, basically having an international career where I was travelling 8 to 10 times overseas and working with the National Academy of Sciences and the World Health Organization. And I felt like I had more to give. I know that sounds crazy, but I was giving in an area of just food allergy, and I felt my voice, I just wanted to have a bigger impact. And so people often say, gosh, you had such a lot of change, but what I did wasn't change. It was more of the same. I took the same skills and just applied them to a different environment. Now, that's not to say I didn't jump off a cliff. I mean, it literally felt when I ran for politics like I jumped off a cliff, because the week that I actually got pre-selected, meaning I got chosen by the party to represent Higgins, on the Monday, I went into the Children's and handed in, after 28 years, my resignation. On the Tuesday, I went to Melbourne Girls Grammar, where I was chair, and handed it over to my deputy chair. On Wednesday, I resigned from the board of Cabrini. On Thursday, I was meant to be leading an international conference at our institute with international visitors for my Centre of Food and Allergy Research that I'd set up, and said to them, I'm handing them over to 2 young, capable women who I've been training up. And then on the Friday, I basically gave $6 million in research grants to my team of 30 people and said, go forth and prosper.
Wow.
And so on Saturday, I mean, literally, this is literally what was my week. On Saturday, I felt like I'd been ripped bare of all the things that I had done with my life, and I was jumping off a cliff, and I said to my family of 4 children, a husband, "You're it." So it was a pretty big week.
Wow. So when you say you're it, what do you mean by that in the context of your life and where you were going?
Well, I had done a lot, and I really wanted to do more. But at the end of the day, my rock is my family.
Yeah.
If you don't get your family right, and I used to say that to you, Sue, I think.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I think
Definitely
if you can't care for your own children, you can't tell other people how to care for children. And we were at the children's hospital. So, family comes first and getting them right. And so they were my rock. They were never going anywhere, and they have always known that. And so your it was it, in that there was nothing left of my career. I'd basically taken my CV and ripped it in half. And I was going out, to be the next member for Higgins, which we fully expected I was going to win the seat because it was a blue ribbon seat. And I was very excited, petrified in some ways, but excited. And when I describe to people the difference between politics and paediatrics, I say being a politician is a little bit like being a community politician is like being a local doctor. You're caring for people instead of talking about Giardia. You're talking about JobKeeper. You're helping people with visas. You're helping people with their lives, with their businesses. So it's really hands-on caring for people, which is like being a local doctor. And then I think leading a research team is like leading an election campaign. You basically have an idea, you pull people together, you have to build your own team, you have to do your own media, you have to do your own fundraising, you have to run their own, you know what that's like, Sue. So that's very similar. And then going up to Canberra is literally like an international conference where people come with different views, different voices, speaking different languages, and you need to find a common place and common ground to get the outcomes that you need to get.
I love that analogy, and is that a perspective you've gained in looking back, or because when you describe ripping up your CV and that's letting go of that and you're moving into something new and you're yet to discover what that's like, although I imagine by then you'd had some experience in Victoria around the community and party politics. I guess I'm curious about what it was first like for you when you stepped into that new landscape.
Again, a lot of people said, oh, gosh, it must be so different. And I say to people, well, science is the contest of ideas, and so is politics. So I used to say 80% of my old job was content and 20% was politics. And again, everyone who has ever been in a workplace or a family, knows what politics is. It's about working out the power balance between one person and another. That's just politics. While my new job was 80% politics and 20% content. But it was a contest of ideas. That's what politics should be. It doesn't always end up being that, but that's what it felt like for me. And, where I'd come from was getting up and standing up and being brave enough to say perhaps what needs to be asked, asking the tough questions. People used to say, people would, shaking their boots when I'd ask the question internationally because I'd ask the hard questions. And that's what you have to do in politics as well. So I'm probably trying to give for your listener a bit of an idea about, it's like entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs apparently don't take risks. They just take calculated risks. And I think what I was doing, I was taking a calculated risk. I knew what I was doing, and I knew that there was a lot of similarities. And but also, I often say this to people when I'm giving them advice. When you're going through change, the things that you have learned along your journey haven't been taken away from you. You're still that person. You still have all of those skills, and they're in your packed bag. So you might feel like you're challenging yourself, that you're ripping up your CV, but you can't undo what you've done, and you can't undo the experiences that you had.
It's interesting that you say that, because when I think back to when I left MCRI, people said to me, "Oh, you're so brave." I didn't feel brave at
They
the
say
time.
that a lot, yeah.
It just felt like the next thing
Yes,
for me.
next natural
and
step.
the next natural step.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear you describe that.
I've often said that people said to me about a lot of things I've done in my life that I'm brave, very brave, and then there's a ... and they don't say it, but I've always thought it was but stupid.
Oh.
Like, well, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't have 4 kids, or I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't take 4 kids to Europe for 3 months, or I wouldn't do that. So that brave but stupid. But someone said to me when I went into politics, I think you've got grit, and I really liked that word.
Yeah.
Because it's a different word. It's not brave but stupid. It's you've got grit and determination.
So tell me more about grit.
Well, I think grit has embedded in it a concept of going through thick and thin. But it's also, it's a bit of a harder word in that brave, as I said before, isn't really something that, you necessarily would do yourself. But I think grit is an Australian term, which is that resilience, the resilience to keep going even when the chips are down.
Yeah, I can really understand that. And I wonder what grit was needed as a woman in her 50s entering Parliament.
Yeah.
Which is traditionally known as a male-dominated space and a young man's game. So what was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the age thing is a big issue, I think particularly for women. And I do think once you reach the age of 50 as a woman, you can become invisible in the community. And I was starting to feel that, starting to feel that people look past you as a woman, and that's got to change. So when people talk about politics, they say, I'd love to be an MP, and they're 25. And you go, well, imagine if I joined, they've just joined the party. Imagine if I became, an employee of the National Australia Bank and I said, oh, tomorrow could you make me the CEO? I mean, I think that there needs to be experience, and I think there needs to be a skill set that's been worked up. I don't think you should just, land there and hope you're going to be okay. And I think the experience that I had, as a paediatrician and as a professor, but also as a mother, was used particularly through COVID, and the experiences of dealing with life's events. And I felt very sorry for people who hadn't been through life experiences and couldn't provide those, kind of, actual experiences and talking about them with people that have real meat to them, not theory from a book. They're real experiences. So people often talk about the third act for women, and I think there really is a third act. I think, you sort out yourself, you sort out your family, then you can have a third act.
It's time for you.
Yeah. And there's a lot of women who are starting to wake up to that, which I think is brilliant. And, that's us.
Yeah.
Hear us roar.
Yes, definitely. Speaking of grit, you didn't always take the path of least resistance, and you crossed the floor to support amending the Sex Discrimination Act to remove exemptions that allowed faith-based organisations to discriminate against LGBTIQA plus people, including staff and students in religious schools. What was it like defying your party's expectations, and were there consequences of that?
I'm very proud of what I did, and there were definite consequences. Very negative consequences for my political career, and I knew there would be. I was lined up to be minister, and they said, you're going to have to sit on your hands for a while now, having done that. But someone said to me, "Oh, it looked like you made a decision in the last few minutes," and I said it was a 3-year decision. It was a 3-year decision where I'd been working with the Attorney General, first Christian Porter and then Michaelia Cash, to try and knock the bill into some sort of shape that I could support it. And it started off in good shape because they just replaced one word with another of the Sex Discrimination Act. And then they basically weren't, the right wing of the party weren't happy with it. So they started again and created what I would describe as, an unvotable bill. So we worked with it to knock it into shape, and we got close. We got close with the deal, which I would have been fine with. But then the Prime Minister basically said, well, let's just do half of the deal and not the other half. Yet he'd let me go out publicly and say I was backing the bill for both halves. So you can't I mean, put aside the moral thing, I was never going to support something morally that I couldn't support. But to say to one part of the community, you're okay, and the other part of the community, you're not. I mean, I couldn't sleep at night. Yeah, but put aside the fact that morally I couldn't sleep at night, he had broken a political deal publicly. So there was a second reason. And I've never been on the record of talking about it because I feel my actions speak louder than words. But the night that we did it, we were up until I think the vote went through at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. And after it, I just couldn't sleep. I was so, electrified by what we had just done. And the weight of the parliament was sitting very heavily on our shoulders. But I felt relief because I'd had 3 months of thinking, I'm going to have to make a choice and I don't know if they're going to let me make the right choice. And so it was relief that I had done what I needed to do.
Made your choice.
Made the right decision.
Yeah. And in your maiden speech, you said that you've always stood up for a better future. And I wonder when you look back on this time in Parliament, those 3 years, what you're most proud of?
So, I think, crossing the floor, which is this kind of negative thing that, like, I think in science, blocking someone from getting what they need to do, it's always hard, but, sometimes necessary. So I'm proud of that, but it's not a positive thing that I did. I am very proud of our ability to get net zero 2050 for climate change. That took a long time and it was a lot of work, and it's been reversed by the party more recently, which is unforgivable. And then a third thing is all the work I did with COVID. I did a huge amount of work across the parliamentary aisles, which people don't know about, but the ability to personally inform the Prime Minister of this country and the Minister for Health, and for them to say on 6 or 7 occasions on the floor of Parliament, thank you for your insights and for your public health experience and for your support in leading this country to the best, second best by the Lancet's assessment, second best health response in the world. I'm extremely proud of that. And I can never tell people all the things that I did. But yeah, I was there on the front line. And I remember the night that we decided to change close the international borders. I was a big supporter of changing international borders, but I think that the state-based local closures and curfews and things were far too hard. So I was pro-international borders, but anti-internal, because I think Dan Andrews didn't manage COVID in the state properly. Every other state managed COVID outbreaks, and he couldn't manage the outbreaks, and that just doesn't seem to be acknowledged. So I think we had a very good COVID response, but I do remember the night that we decided to close the international borders, and I had advised the Prime Minister on that. It was Brendan Murphy's recommendation, but I'd backed it in. And I remember lying in bed that night with my heart just beating at 150 beats per minute the whole night, just thinking, oh my God, what have we done? Because, this is early on, and internationally we were laughed at for doing it. It was the right decision as people see in hindsight. Yeah. But I knew that we'd be changing people's lives. We'd be separating people from their families, that businesses would be closing as a result of what we were doing. And the impact was immeasurable. And it turned out to be that way. But it was a very scary decision to make for 27 million people. And when I talk about the decision the Prime Minister made in those early sort of weeks and months, which, by the way, he was the second most popular Prime Minister in our history for a year. Most people forget that. He then became very unpopular, partly based on those decisions he made about portfolios, which, again, crossed a line in my mind from a government's point of view. But so I likened the analogy he made in those first early weeks to, he was a pilot of Plane Australia, and he was having to land it as he faced both the Spanish flu and the Great Depression, in one go. So he's facing an economic impact and the Spanish flu, and he's trying to find a safe haven. And every day he had to come out and tell 27 million people, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. It's extraordinary, really.
It is absolutely extraordinary, and I think that he was incredibly lucky to have someone like you on his team. And I think when I looked back over the things that you were involved with during your time in Parliament, many of them were because of your expertise in medical research. That was so. When you described earlier about it wasn't such a different career; it was a continuation. I could see that coming through in the sorts of things that you were doing, and COVID in particular is a lovely example of that. And that you sat with the gravity of that advice and those decisions is testament to.
But we did so many other things. Many other things, like we did Maeve's Law, which is about mitochondrial transplantation with Mike Freelander. So that was a big win across, again, Mike and I worked across the parliamentary divide. We also managed to bring in $26 million for the National Allergy Strategy. I worked very hard on that. So that was, again, a continuation of my own work. And we just did a whole lot of things. People don't realise how much the Australian government, does, basically. And it was thrilling to be able to help make those decisions.
You were on the inside.
Yeah, and to actually push some money to preventative health, for instance, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it was really great to be able to. And, Greg did say COVID is eating up our budget. So if we hadn't have had COVID, I would have had much more fun in some ways. It would have got further with all of that stuff. But, yeah, I did, when I was in politics, I did feel like I was made for it.
Nice. And you went from the highs of winning in 2019 to losing your seat in 2022 at a time when there was a massive swing away from the Liberal Party and towards Teals and the ALP. Many people would have been really crushed by that experience and retreated into the background, and I was thinking I would probably like to stay in bed for a little while. But you didn't. You took on new roles in medical research, on boards, consultancy, and you even launched a podcast. Tell us about how you flourished. And I think you were 56 by this time, and after suffering such a blow. Yeah.
Look, it was a total blow. I felt like it was so close and it was ripped from us in many ways. And, when I say us, it was the team. There's a whole office full of young workers who lost their job that night. That was the thing that crushed me. And I was I actually only burst into tears when the last one got a job. Because, these people, I took them over the cliff. And so, to place them all in good jobs, which they all got, because my office had a brilliant, reputation of being a great place to work and well trained up. So they all found great jobs. So that's when I burst into tears from relief. Because, I was the second income in our family. So I had a lot of freedom to be able to do what I wanted to do. And so I felt that I had unfinished business and I was going to have another crack and it was going to come back to us. So, it didn't need much of a swing to win it back. And then, of course, I got pre-selection for Higgins, but then, of course, there was a redistribution. Higgins was abolished and that was a second crushing blow. So then I won pre-selection for Chisholm, which was good, but it wasn't the same seat as Higgins. And, Higgins were my people, I've grown up in Higgins and been here for 40 years. So I did have to get to know a new seat. I mean, it was only next door, but that was a lot of work. And I think that you just got to keep going, really. And I just wanted one more crack at it. But I did go, it'll only be one more crack because I'm 56 and I was aware of my age constantly. Luckily, I feel like I'm a very youthful person. But, yeah, you are, because people go, oh, you're 56, and they do all these calculations and they're very judgmental. It was quite helpful that Kamala Harris actually was running at 56 or 58 because then suddenly she seemed young compared to Trump.
That's right.
So I seemed young, so I was quite happy about that.
Nice comparison.
Thank you.
And so those years in between, what was that like? What were you up to?
Look, I have to say there were days early on where I just lay on the bed and cried or, spent the day watching Netflix going, what the hell am I doing? Yeah. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to start with. But the Murdoch was very embracing and supportive, and I'm extremely grateful to Catherine North, the CEO, for bringing me on as a consultant and, paying some bills. It was very generous of her. And I think I was also proud of the fact that she didn't think I'd been tainted. And, the Murdoch and the Royal Children have unblemished records. And so they're not going to take, tarnished goods. So the fact they took me, I was very proud of that I've been a politician for 3 years and they've felt that I was still okay to take back into their beautiful, unblemished, environment. Yeah, very proud of that. I'm very grateful.
Yeah. And I mentioned that you did a podcast. Having started my own podcast this year, I know there's a bit to learn about how to do a podcast. What was it like for you?
It was great fun. I mean, I like to talk to people, but I did one a week for a year, and it was called An Apple a Week with Dr. Katie Allen. So I got my daughter's boyfriend to help me with the opening jingle, which I thought was great, which was, if you want to learn about politics, come here sort of thing, or what's like to fail, come here. But my very first interview was with Jeremy Hunt. And the day that I launched the interview, he'd been the longest serving health minister and I'd been over in England. So I did the podcast when I met him over there. And I went over to talk to him as a backbencher and what it was like to be health secretary, which is minister in the UK, and to get some advice. And he was in this huge office. He'd kept the health minister's or health secretary's office. They couldn't evict him. And it's this massive office looking out over Big Ben. And, it was beautiful, wood-lined, books everywhere. And I didn't know this, but he'd written a book. And I said, he said, would you like a copy? And I said, sure. And it was about Zero. It's called Zero, I think, which is about trying to get patient safety to the point where you don't have any accidents. And I think the UK budget for accidents and being litigated against is some huge amount. And I might be wrong on this, might be 20% of the health budget, like out of control. So really interesting book. I said, I'd love to read the book. Would you like to be on my podcast? And of course, because he'd just been, written this book, of course, he wanted to come on my podcast. So I was very thrilled to have this very high profile person. Well, the next day he was the Chancellor of the UK.
Oh.
The timing was impeccable. Anyway, my second guest, which again was interviewed while I was in the UK, was Matt Hancock, who'd also been Health Secretary. And the next day he was voted on to I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here. So everyone kept saying, every time you go on a podcast with Katie Allen, something substantial happens.
I'm looking forward to my future.
Yeah, well, you've got some great guests, but it was such a privilege. I mean, I basically interviewed all of the great, the good of the Liberal Party, Alan Finkel, Chief Scientist, who's also he's a constituent of Higgins, just some fantastic people. And I mean, my problem is I talk too much, so I had to let my guests talk, not me. But I really enjoyed it, totally enjoyed it.
Lovely. So you mentioned the Kamala Harris and, comparison and the age thing. When you think back to your experiences in your 50s, is there anything you wish society knew or could change about how they see women in their 50s or women over 50?
Yeah, I think that women over 50 have a huge amount of wisdom. We've managed to get our kids through school. We've managed household budgets. We've managed, husbands and kids or partners and kids, who are going through life's experiences, who need support from us. We've got so much experience, and it just sometimes I think people don't really acknowledge that. Yet for a man, it's seen as, little few sort of silver hairs here and there and a little bit of a scar here and there. That's kind of attractive. And so a kind of slightly crusty man is attractive, while a slightly crusty woman is not. So we have to work hard. Look, I haven't had any work done, but I know a lot of people who have. But, to sort of keep up with the Joneses. And I think the important thing for women is not to try to do that. And I think it would be great if women could just be women and we didn't have to compete in that way about, gee, you look good.
Yeah. And be
it shouldn't be
recognised
about that.
For wisdom, the wisdom and experience.
The wisdom and experience.
As you said.
Yeah.
So you did stand again in 2025, in the 2025 federal election, and there was another historic swing toward Labor.
Huge, yeah.
And many Liberal candidates were unsuccessful, and that included you. And now this is the hard part. You've since shared that you've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. What would you like to tell us about that?
It's a bitch of a disease. Yeah, it's a nasty disease. It's not one that you'd want. But, 10 years ago, you know, breast cancer stage 4 was a death sentence. 5 years ago, malignant melanoma stage 4 was a death sentence. And we're on a cusp of new treatments for pancreatic and cholangiocarcinoma, of which one of them I'm on, which is an extraordinary gene-targeted treatment. It's called conjugate therapy. And it seems to be working. How long it will work for, to the degree, we're not certain. So there is hope, but you are hanging on to hope, hope and a prayer. So, you talk about having to have grit and determination for pediatrics or politics, but this is the greatest challenge I've ever had to face. It's an existential crisis.
And has the diagnosis changed your perspective on life and what matters?
Now, I don't think what matters, because I think I've always put my family first and friends and career. But definitely, Malcolm has said this, my husband, which is you wouldn't want to wish this on anyone, but we've lived every minute since we've been diagnosed to the absolute fullest. And people have been so generous and so wonderful and, so supportive. And we've had so many lovely experiences because people say, live life to the fullest. So, get on the plane, you don't, go business. You don't go economy if you can afford it. You go business, or you might have the French champagne rather than the normal champagne. So we do go the extra step because, like, how long have you got? Or we do spend that extra time with the children, or we do spend that extra time with friends, and the intensity of the relationships has only got greater. And I have more time for my family and friends now too, because I've kind of retired.
Wow, there's that word.
Yes. Well, I haven't really retired in some ways because I'm still working at the Murdoch and I'm still on some boards and I'm still driving projects through. But it does feel like I've retired because I don't go into work on a regular basis. And, my health needs a lot of attention, so I have to go to lots of appointments and things. So, family and friends, then health, then work. Yeah. So that's the perspective that's changed probably. Yeah. But, you have to, the only perspective is always put family and then work, but health is a big part of it now. And it's very time consuming, all the things that you have to do to keep healthy and well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So for women with the sort of that perspective that you now have and the experience that you've had that we've been talking about today, for a woman wondering whether it's worth it to risk it all and follow their dream and pursue their next adventure, what do you say to her now?
Just do it. Yeah. Look, I've got 4 children. The youngest, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, has decided that next year, at 22, he's going to do an acting course. And, he's been at university, he's finished his degree, and he just wants to have a crack at acting. And he knows how hard it is. He knows that he could fail. He knows he could be stricken with poverty, all those things. But he wants to have a crack. And people say, if you don't do it now, when will you do it? Well, you do it in your 3rd act. You either do it in your 1st act or you do it in your 3rd act. So you've got, as I said, I've been lucky because financially I'm the 2nd income earner and we are financially not under stress. But the kids have, I think once the kids have gone through school and, they can look after themselves now. They're all getting jobs and, we'd like to help them hopefully get into a home. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of financial relief that's come off. So that allows us to make these decisions and to have a crack. So I just say to people, of course, you've got to worry about finances and maybe you can't afford to do it, and that's a very different situation. But if you can afford to do it, just have a go. Yeah.
Yes.
You don't want to have no regrets.
Yes. No regrets. What I've been really struck by in this interview is the absolute care and compassion that you have for the people you love and the people in your community and the people of Australia. And that's really shone through in everything that you've talked about today. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm very proud to be Australian, actually. My husband, Malcolm, said that his greatest moment this year was going to a citizenship ceremony. So there's a young Chinese man who was on my team, and he's comes from a family in China that's very well connected and has a very strong future ahead of him if he went back to China. But he's decided to give that all up and come to Australia. And Malcolm sees that, and we were there as his parentis locus. I mean, he'll never be able to return to China. And he nominated us as his guests at the citizenship ceremony. And Malcolm was so proud of that because he said, I'm so proud to be Australian, and Australia is such a great country.
Yeah. And then, of course, your time in Parliament and the things that you've done. And as a member of the LGBTIQ plus community, I think that what you did was incredibly, I was going to use the brave word, but it's not.
Courageous.
Yeah, courageous, and just that way that you described it as being really true to what you believe to be important, and being able to step forward and live that through your actions makes me really proud to know you as well.
Oh, thank you, Sue. That really means the world.
Thank you.
I actually apparently gave the most amount of speeches in the 46th Parliament.
And you did say I like to talk.
I do like to talk. But the whip, I didn't know they were keeping count. And the whip said, which is the person who keeps count, says, you did this. I said, do we get a statue or prize? And he said, no, we just keep count. And he said, why did you do that? And I said, well, every piece of legislation I wanted to know what I was voting on. And the only way for me to do that was to give a speech and really understand it. So when people say, oh, it must have been hard, you had to change your values or morals, or no, I never voted any time. And if there wasn't something right, I went up to the whip and said, sorry, can't vote for this. So I never had to cross my conscience or support something that I didn't believe in. And, I took a lot of care to make sure that was the case. But your words mean the world to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Really appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you.
So as we wind up, and thank you for being so generous and candid in sharing the way that you have today, when future generations think back about Katie Allen, what do you hope they'll say?
I hope I've been heard. Yeah, that's it.
Katie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Flourish After 50. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow in your favourite podcast app. I offer coaching and facilitate small group programs for women just like you, and have a newsletter where I share the details of upcoming events. All the links are available in the show notes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep flourishing.